This is another show from the Mamma Mia Podcast Network, the world's largest women's podcast network.
No Filter is brought to you by the Telstra Smart Home app. Telstra brings you the magic of technology with Smart Home, a clever little app that I have that lets you manage your home from anywhere and is awesome. Just a warning, this is an adult conversation between adults, so if you have little ears in the vicinity, you might want to grab some headphones. Hi, I'm Mia Friedman and welcome to No Filter. Nikki Gemmell wears her heart on her sleeve. She always has, as the author of 9 novels and 4 non-fiction books, all of which have been bestsellers, including the iconic Bride's Trip to Bear. Nikki is also a very popular newspaper columnist, and it was in her column just over a year ago that her readers learned that Nikki's mother had died very suddenly and without explanation.
Nothing prepares you for it, for the slight smell of death.
In the months that followed, Nikki did what she always does to understand how she feels, whether it's about sex or motherhood or death. She wrote from her heart with searing, heartbreaking honesty about her mother, their incredibly intense, difficult relationship, and about her mother's death and the mystery that unfolded from it. Nikki didn't tell anyone she was writing this book. Nobody. There was no word in the industry, no word among her friends. It just landed on my desk one day, straight from the publisher, unannounced. And I took it home that afternoon and I just glanced quickly at the first page. I intended to maybe read it when I had more time. I was really busy, I had lots of stuff to do. And yet I couldn't put it down until I turned the last page several hours later. It's an extraordinary book, and I couldn't wait to talk to her about it. Nick, what an extraordinary book that just landed, and I didn't even know you were writing another one. Did you know you were writing another one?
I was meant to be writing a different book, and I had to put that all aside when my mum was found dead. It felt like a detective story to me. It was like this most surreal situation, the most devastating situation I've ever been in. The police came to my door and they just said, your mother's died. And there was she lives quite close to me in her little flat. They set up a crime scene. They took her body away. I had to go to the morgue to identify her. At that stage, we didn't know how she died, but most importantly, why. There was no note, no indication. So for me, I guess I did what I've always done, which is to write to understand. So I wrote to kind of ask myself questions and to find out what really happened there. So that's why I say it was like a detective story, working back from a dead body that just so happened to be my beautiful mother's, but to try and get into her headspace and work out what she'd done and why.
You start the book in the morgue, and it does unfold like an extraordinary page turner, but also it reads like it just fell out of you in terms of the beauty of it, the exquisite descriptions you have of grief and grieving and coming unstuck. That day at the morgue, you have such an incredibly vivid eye for details, and it was just a beautiful sunny Saturday and not where you expected to be.
No.
Where was your relationship with your mum at that point, just before that day?
It had been great. We had had the best year of our lives after being at each other's throats for almost my entire adulthood. I say in the book, Mum was the love of my life, but she was also the hate of my life. And I quote Hilary Mantel talking about Margaret Thatcher, who said that for a lot of women, we leave our mothers in our mid-teens and we start judging them, and we judge harshly. And I feel like that's what I did with my mum. I judged her very, very harshly. I pushed her away. I pushed her out of my world. She wanted to control my world. She wanted to control me. She wanted to make me a vision of a daughter that she'd always dreamed of. I stuck my heels in and I rebelled against that. and I broke her heart in the process. And I feel like we went through years and years and decades of hurting each other.
That's a very generous reading of your relationship with your mum. I was shocked by how cruel she was to you in many ways. Yeah. I'll read a passage that you wrote. She said, you wrote, Samuel Johnson wrote that his life was one long escape from himself. My life was one long escape from my mother, from the woman she wanted as a daughter. In adulthood, I lived in a lot of places far away that were resolutely not home, nowhere near the flinch of that until the end, the final 5 years of Elayn's life when I returned after decades of gypsy wandering to deal with my past or not. You talk about in your teenage years, you start to judge your mother, but she seemed to judge you very harshly. There were some extreme examples of cruelty that you mentioned, like one that's just stuck with me is that she used to memorize the negative book reviews that you would get and read passages back to you.
Yeah.
What was that about?
I have no idea. I often think my mother was a product of her generation. You know, she was a woman from the 50s. She was very smart. She left school at 16. She wasn't expected to go on and be educated. She was expected to go off and into marriage and motherhood. That was the path set out for her by all the women around her. And I think she went through her adulthood very bitter and frustrated. And I know I'm not the only woman of my generation, my age, who says that we have very kind of bitter, angry mothers. They were pre-feminists. Then the feminist era came along, but they just kind of missed it. And then their daughters are the post-feminists. And we go out there, we stride out into the world, strong and empowered, wanting to do our own thing, which is not necessarily what our mothers wanted us to do. But they don't necessarily celebrate that. There's a competitiveness there.
And a resentment.
A resentment. And I always feel like with Mum, she was trying to put me in my place. But I think that was a generational thing too. It was the tall poppy thing. It was like, you know, we're not going to mention Nikki's achievements or her writing or we've got to keep her in her place. I don't know why she was like that. I think if she'd been happier in her life, with her life, she would have had a more generous spirit. I don't know, but I do feel very strongly that she was a product of her age.
I don't know, because my mum is of the same generation and she always has lifted me up and celebrated
You're so lucky.
everything that I have done and really revelled in my freedoms that she didn't have, the freedoms that she didn't have at my age and the choices that she didn't get to make. And she's like marvelled at my generation's ability to kick ass and live in this post-feminist world. Whereas Elayn really did seem to resent your freedoms and your choices.
Yeah, and what you're saying about your mother is what we say about our daughters.
Yeah.
We just look at them and we go, oh, just bloom, girl, just bloom and stride out. And my mother never had that.
What did she want you to be?
Oh, well, she never wanted to be what I was. I can remember in my late teens when I got glasses for the first time, and she was like, oh, you're so ugly. You're so ugly with those glasses on. She used to be a model. It was all about...
She was extraordinarily beautiful.
She was so beautiful. She always made me feel like lacking somewhat in that department. I was the little dag at school. You know, I was the nerd who had my little group. I was never in the cool group, all that kind of thing. I ended up being a goth who always wore vintage or black.
Was that a rebellion against her incredible beauty and she always wore amazing clothes? And
I just didn't want her world.
Yeah.
I just, you know, this is going back to the judgment that Margaret Thatcher and Hilary Mantel talk about of a girl who's 15. I just wasn't interested, didn't rate it, judged, you know, her shoulder pads and her big lips and her perms and all the rest of it. It's just like, you know, it's not my world. And I think I judged harshly, and she sensed that. So we were always rubbing up against each other. And then when I left university and I got a job in radio, it was always like, but she wanted wanted me to have a job in television. She always
She was
wanted something.
obsessed with you having a job in television.
I know, because it's like she had this certain image of success and the successful woman, and it was like she wanted a Jana Wendt daughter, Caroline Jones daughter.
And then what about when you had this extraordinary success that you had really quite young as an author and as a writer, and your books have sold, millions of copies. They've been on bestseller lists for decades. You're one of the most successful authors this country's ever produced. Did that change her view of you when you had these external markers of your success that she couldn't argue with?
I think she was always afraid of my writing, of what it might reveal, because I've always been very honest about her, about everyone. I've always been very honest in my writing, and one of the first things that I got published was a short story in Quadrant magazine. It was about the coal mining generations, my father, my grandfather, my great-grandfather. And I can remember that moment. I can still remember the moment of Les Murray, who is still the literary editor, Australia's greatest poet.
What an honour.
What an honour. I was like 18, 19, and he picked the short story out, and he just wrote in his acceptance letter, "If you made this up, you're a genius." And of course I hadn't made it up.
It was your life.
It was my life.
But your parents were divorced and it was your father's side of the family.
Yeah, it was my father's side. And Mum hated to see me lifting up my father's side of his working world, his coal mining world. She'd fought all her life to escape from the little world of the Hunter Valley, which was coal mining families, which was, coal dust, which is men scrubbing the black off their hands over the laundry sink when they came in. It was cat lamps and crib tins for lunch and
she was ashamed
disaster.
of all that.
Yeah, I think when she moved to Sydney and she reinvented herself, and this is what my book celebrates too. She was the mistress of reinvention. She hauled herself up by the bootstraps and became someone very glamorous, very corporate. She became a working mother. But I also think, and now that I'm a mother myself, I'm fascinated by women who become mothers who are non-maternal. And they do exist.
That's such a taboo, isn't it?
Yeah, she was a non-maternal
and she
mother,
said to you,
to me.
I wish I hadn't. She said, I wish I hadn't had children, right?
Yeah, she said if I had my time over again, I never would have had kids. And when she said that, it was like it just burst open this kind of, incredible understanding of her in terms of we had held her back. We had nibbled away at her. We had 3 kids. We'd chipped away at her serenity, her equilibrium, her energy, all the rest of it. And yes, she would have been the most fantastic single woman, working woman, without the kind of encumbrance of children, I think. Whereas I see motherhood very differently. And I just have enormous kind of gratitude for that I'm able to have that, as well as having a career. But for Mum, I always felt, at least for me, I was like the daughter who was just dragging her down when she wanted to be doing something else in her life.
That's a horrible way for someone to make you feel. I mean, you talk about, and I've heard this said before, the idea of withholding love from someone who wants it is one of the cruelest things you can do. Did you feel that that's what she did to you?
Oh, well, that she was like a maternal terrorist. All through my adulthood, it would always come to a peak on my birthday, and I would never know if she was going to contact me or not. So no matter what kind of birthday I was having, there would always be this kind of like catch in my throat of, oh, will Mummy, and she was still Mummy, deep into my 40s, will Mummy ring me today? Will she ring me? And it would either be this effusive kind of beautifully packaged gifts and just all the love and the delight and the reveling in her daughter, or more often it would be dead silence. And that was absolutely felling. It was felling, in my late teens. It was felling in my 20s, my 30s, my 40s, to have absolute silence from my mother on my birthday. Like, she didn't care, and she'd hijack it. Whatever happiness I was having, just to know that Mum was doing that with her silence broke me.
Would you confront her about it and say, Mum, it was my birthday?
No, I hate confrontation. And every year, because her birthday's about 4 months after mine, I'd think, I'm going to do it to her this year. I'm just going to make her feel how she makes me feel every year. I'm just going to ignore her and give her dead silence just so that she knows what she's done. And then every year, to get closer and closer to her birthday, I just think, I can't sink to that level. I just can't do it. And it was funny when I'd ring her, she'd be relieved. We had lots of silences in our lives. And I think that's what I talk about in the book. It was such a waste of energy. It was such a waste, the hurt, the pain we inflicted on each other, the stupid, awful words we said to each other to try and break each other. We both knew each other's Achilles' heels. It was just like, why? Why did we do that?
In the morgue that awful day, there was a police officer, a young woman, like ridiculously young.
Yes, half my age. Yeah.
Sitting in the corner. Did that strike you as odd at the time?
It didn't strike me as odd then because I was just reeling from shock and devastation. And she was the most glorious crutch. She was just so tender and sympathetic and just lovely.
And she later told you that she had to leave a couple of times while you were identifying the body.
Yeah.
What's it like having to identify a body? Is it like in the movies?
I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. And no, it's not like in the movies because nothing prepares you for it, for the slight smell of death, for the feel of flesh, which is like, the flesh that you know so well, that the hand that you've touched your whole life, the cheek that you've kissed your whole life. There's kind of like a deep, deep coldness, compressed, condensed cold. And then what I wasn't also prepared for was my mum's hands, her old lady hands. They were kind of clawed in agony. It was so distressing to see. It was like at the last minute she tried to fight death off or whatever. I since know that, that was probably rigor mortis or something, just drawing in the fingers. But it's so confronting. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. And in terms of, people who, well, I can't really say, if you're planning to do something, just have a think about those people close to you who have to go to the morgue in absolute shock
and identify you.
We had another family ahead of us, and they had also, you could just tell, had this terrible shock of suddenly having to identify someone as well. And the shattered look on their face was the shattered look on my face and my brother's face, and we just looked at each other and we just kind of just acknowledged each other like, we know the pain you're in. We know the pain. And, yeah, we're all going through this in a similar way, and it's just awful. It's just awful.
An investigation opened up into your mother's death because it wasn't known quite how she died.
Yeah.
It takes time, and you find out that she... How do you describe it? You write so beautifully about the difference between the word suicide and the difference between the word euthanasia.
Yeah.
How do you describe it, what happened to her?
My mum chose to have... I can't even say it's a good death, because I do ask the question in the book, is this a good death? She chose to do it her way. Which is how she led her life, I think. It's how she loved, how she did everything, which was kind of very alone in a way. So what she
almost defiantly alone.
Yeah, defiantly.
Do you think there were legal reasons for that?
I do. What I didn't realise at the time, and subsequently I've gone into this huge investigation of euthanasia laws, all the rest of it. Mum had done her research. I had no idea about this. She had been liaising with Philip Nitschke and his organisation Exit International for 8 years.
And you found that out
she did it
when Philip Nitschke tweeted you after you wrote a column, right?
Yes, I wrote a column in the Australian newspaper asking basically all my readers, because I had no idea, was this death empowerment or despair? And I've never had a huger response to a column. And there are a few haters in there who basically said, she died a junkie's death and things like that. But most people were so thoughtful and so interesting in terms of, either they were elderly thinking along these lines, or they were adult children with elderly parents, and these conversations had been going on with their households or not going on, as the situation was with us. And so I wrote, you know, in the column, was this empowerment or despair, posing the question. Philip Nitschke tweeted shortly after it was published.
So modern.
I know, so modern, saying, Nikki, it was empowerment. And in his tweet, he basically explained that, you know, my mum had been reading his Peaceful Pills handbook. She used to go along to his forums in the city. And
Philip Nitschke, we should say, is, I don't know, he doesn't live in Australia anymore. He's a little bit of a pariah in the medical world because of his, can I say, enthusiasm for euthanasia. He doesn't even believe that it needs a medical reason. He believes that anyone who wants to die should be allowed to die.
Yes, it was interesting because I came from that perspective too. I was furious when he tweeted, and I thought, oh, he's just, you know, why is he doing this? He's got books to sell and all the rest of it. But actually, I began a conversation with him from that point.
Off Twitter.
Yeah. I contacted Exit International and I said, you know, it sounds like Philip knows something about my mother. Could I please talk to him?
Yeah.
And so I did. And I actually came away from the situation impressed by his sense of compassion. He does deeply care about people who are in immense pain. And he helped me incredibly because a big question I asked of him was, Philip, why didn't Mum tell me anything? Why did she just do it suddenly? And as he explained to me, Nikki, she didn't want to implicate you because as the police, when they came to my door to tell me that my mother had just been found dead, and through all my grief, and I was like sliding down the kitchen wall, just crying and crying, the police had their notebooks out and they were asking me questions, these lovely, lovely, compassionate police officers, but they were trying to find out if I had supplied the pills, if I had helped in any way. And what I didn't realise until days later after talking to people was I could have been charged as an accessory. There were huge legal implications.
If you'd have even known.
If I had been known or been involved in my mother's euthanasia death, it would have had huge legal implications for me or any of her family.
When did she become aware of that? The questions they were, I mean, was your immediate instinct when they knocked on your door, she must have had a heart attack, she must have died in her sleep?
No.
Or you straight away knew?
Yeah, it's that awful feeling. It was like a movie when, you know, two police officers come to your door, and it's just their demeanour and the way they carry themselves and the set of their face. They didn't even say anything, and I just went, my children, because I knew someone had died, and they went, no. And then I went, it's my husband. And they went, no. And then I went, it's my mother. And they went, yes. And as soon as they went, yes, I knew exactly what she'd done. I mean, not the specifics, but I knew that she'd killed herself. I just knew in that moment that she'd gone ahead and she'd done it. Because over the last year of her life, she'd had chronic pain. She had a foot operation about a year before she died to try and fix pain in her foot. She thinks from a lifetime of wearing high heels, fabulous fashion shoes, and also dancing on points as a teenager. So she had an operation to try and correct the whole thing. It didn't work. The physiotherapy after the operation didn't work. It only exacerbated the situation. And what also happened was the surgeon introduced her into the world of Oxycontin, which is an opioid. So she entered the world of prescription painkillers.
And
addiction. And all the rest of it. So she was fighting all these things towards the end of her life. And in the end, she was just overwhelmed by pain and could not see a way out because the painkillers, like any opioids, they were starting to lose their effectiveness. So she came to the end of the road. But she'd spoken about it. You know, she'd said to me things like, she'd started to talk about euthanasia, and I'd always get really emotional. And I think now I did it entirely wrong. I'd always be like, but Mum, don't you want to see the grandchildren grow up? My youngest, little Jago, he's only 5. And I just couldn't get into my head that she'd want to leave. Well, of course she'd want to leave me, but she wouldn't want to leave the kids.
Oh, that's an awful thing that you just said. Of course she'd want to leave me.
She wouldn't want to leave the kids more than she'd want to leave me. But and she'd just say the pain's so great. But we never had a sit-down, rational conversation. And I know now, in hindsight, I should have done it completely differently. I should have sat down with her very calmly, very evenly, and said, Mum, what do you want to do? Let's talk about it. And I should have given her that opening in the conversation, and I never did, because I'd always get too emotional and burst into tears and fob it off. And I never actually thought she'd actually do it until she did.
One of the readers that wrote to you after you wrote that column was Elayn. Tell me about her.
Elayn wrote to me after I wrote about that column, Is This Empowerment or Despair? And she was a reader who is a doctor, and she's been living with pain for several decades. And she said, Nikki, I'm in your mother's headspace. I know exactly why she did it. I can tell you if it's empowerment or despair, because I'm planning to do it too. But the difference is with me is that with my 4 children, we have been talking to each other every step of the way. And because I'm a medical practitioner, I know all about painkillers, and I have access to all the drugs if I want to use them. And I also have the money to go to Switzerland, to Dignitas.
Where it's legal.
Where it's legal. You go to a clinic in Switzerland. It's quite a heavy vetting process. You have to prove...
You can't just turn up.
No. You have to prove your sound of mind, that you're not depressed. You have to have a letter from your GP. You go there beforehand, and I think it's 3 doctors who assess you, psychiatrists, all the rest of it. But she's planned this very, very carefully. She's been a member of Dignitas for years. And I've never crossed the 4th wall into the wall into the world of my readers before, ever, with all my books or with my columns or anything. I've never stepped across and shook the hands of a total stranger who's just written to me and just said, I want you in my life. But I did, with my heart in my mouth, with this Elayn, and she lives like 2 hours drive away from me. And the morning that I left her address on my writing desk and just said to my husband, you know, if I don't come back, this is where I've gone.
In case she's not really a
you never know.
61-year-old woman.
Exactly.
That's true.
She could be, you know, a 25-year-old axe-murdering hater. Probably
who
got a few
who had a real problem with the bride strip bit.
Exactly. Several decades later,
like Kathy Bates in Misery.
Yeah, exactly. But there was something so genuine and so heartfelt and compassionate about her.
Did you feel a bit like she was an avatar for your mum, that you could ask her a whole lot of questions that you were never able to ask your mum about the decision?
And the very first meeting that we had, she wouldn't tell me her story, and her story was fascinating. She just wanted to know about Elayn, my mother, and our relationship, and my mother's pain.
The names are even similar.
I know. And
you got to know each other quite well.
Quite well. And, well, really well, actually. Just last Sunday we had champagne high tea together.
Well, as I was reading the book, I was like, has she, you know, by the time it comes out, when's she planning to do this? Has she got a date?
In about 2 months.
And how do you feel about that? She's a good friend of yours now.
I feel devastated. I've fallen in love with her. She's the most beautiful woman.
And you can't talk her out of it?
No, not me. No, you know, and this has been something she's been thinking about for several decades. And she's strong, and she's empowered, and she's talked it all through with her kids, and she's on that path, and she's courageous, and she is crippled by pain. And it's not getting any easier for her. For her last year of life, she has taken out a huge chunk of her superannuation, and she has been having the best year of her life with
her
all
bucket
her
list
kids.
year.
Yeah, her bucket list. She's been travelling the world. She's been seeing amazing concerts. She's been going to 5-star hotels. She has been having the most wonderful time, which will...
The farewell tour.
Yeah, which will, she hopes, will be leading into the good death. Whereas I feel so sad for Mum. If she had had these options, she could have had the most amazing year too. She could have had the most amazing year with me, because when we were good, we were very, very good. It's just when we were bad, we were horrid. But we were really good in that last year of her life. And I feel like, in a way, the fact that we were really good, in a small way, it gave her the permission to think, I can do this now. Me and Nick, we're on an even keel. We can let go, both of us. But I'm just so sad that my mother died such a lonely, bleak death. It was so alone.
You say that, but you'd seen her. She lived alone. She was quite fierce about guarding her privacy. She never invited your family over there.
No.
In all the time, she never invited you over for a meal or a cup of tea.
No.
Your version of her death as being bleak and alone, that's how she'd lived her life, so why would her death be different?
I guess so, but contrasting it with Helena, who is planning to have her children and her best friend.
But Helena was a different kind of mother.
Of course,
is a different kind of mother.
And they're all going to be holding hands. Oh. So it will be a room just brimming with love.
More with Nikki in a moment. But first, a message from our fantastic sponsors, Telstra Smart Home. Have you ever left the house and feel you've forgotten to turn something off? Maybe it's your hair straightener. Maybe it's your iron. With Telstra Smart Home and a broadband connection, you can connect to your home and check via the app and see what you might have left on or off when you're not there. Whether it's turning off your hair straightener, seeing that the kids have come home from school, turning the lights on to make it look like someone's home, or even checking whether your delivery has arrived. You can do it all with the Telstra Smart Home app and range of products. Make any house a smart home. I have. Something that made me a little bit angry while I was reading your book was your brothers. That they, in the last year or 2 years, or quite a few years of your mother's life, when you came back from the UK with your husband and your 4 young children, as she became more and more incapacitated and needed more and more help, it was you. And this is not an unusual story.
Yeah.
In terms of it's always the daughter. It tends to be the daughter.
Yes, although I will say I was the only one in close proximity to her. So towards the end of her life, it really was... It was me helping with all the running around because I was there. My brothers lived 2.5, 3 hours away from her. So, geographically it was more difficult for them. But I also have tremendous amount of guilt because in the last month, 2 months of her life, I was always getting these messages, Nikki, can you pick up this fish that I've just ordered from the grilled fish from the fish shop for me? And I'd be like, Mum, I'm 3 suburbs away on a soccer pitch where one of my kids is having a soccer trial. I can't get out of here for another 2 hours. I'm so sorry. And it seemed to be a succession of those kind of things. I think the pills also... She was taking so many of them towards the end. It was doing something with her brain. So it was all kind of felt very jagged and not very organised or ordered. She'd be ringing me at the last minute about something, about a doctor's appointment or whatever. I've got 4 kids. I'm a working mum. I've got no help. I was, frantically running around trying to juggle all the balls, keeping all the balls of the 4 kids, plus a husband, plus a dog and a goldfish and all the rest of it, all up in the air. And I feel terrible to say this, but Mum came 6th in that world.
But you're so tough on yourself. You are so tough on yourself about your relationship with her. You talk about you judging her, about failing her.
But you're tough. She killed herself.
Yeah, but you're tough on yourself in this book, Nick, and even talking to you now.
Okay.
Your brothers aren't around. They don't have 4 little kids and are trying to, write all the books that you do. You did a huge amount and you did everything. You moved back to Australia to repair that relationship. I don't think you give yourself enough credit for everything that you did. She was tough, man.
But don't you feel like it's the woman's lot? That we just expect ourselves to look after the kids, look after the parents.
And it's easier to be indignant on behalf of someone else than it is for yourself. But I've seen this played out with so many women I know, particularly in the sandwich generation, who are looking after little kids. They've got brothers, but they're the ones who are looking after the aging parents. They've got husbands, but they're the ones that are leaving work to go and pick up the kids.
Although I will say my husband was running after Elayn just as much as me. But both of us were feeling like we were failing her. Because often the requests would come in at the last minute. We're both working. It just felt kind of out of kilter or something in those last couple of months. And I think Mum felt out of control. But also, crucially, I think for Mum, a week before she died, she was told that she should not be driving anymore. And I can't underestimate how important driving independence, having her own set of wheels, being able to get around was for Mum. So for her to be told that she just had to give driving away from that point would have been absolutely devastating. She would suddenly become that little old lady stuck in a flat, relying on public transport with its big steps up into the bus, you know, with her absolute pain. She described to me that the pain as she walked was like scissors digging into her groin. That's what it was like when she walked. And by the end of her life, the last kind of month of her life, this beautiful woman who'd been so striking visually, her whole life had been the life of the party, just vivid and vivacious and stunning and beautifully dressed. She was like a withered old lady in a fairy tale towards the very end, and it was the pain that had done that to her. And you know, it's devastating to think that she'd got to that stage, and I don't think she could bear it.
And you even talk about what she was found in, the sort of the I'll read it. Savage pain in her final months was affecting Elayn's sleeping, moving, walking. It was hard for her to find a comfortable seat, the right bed, to shower for a long amount of time. It affected how she dressed. Certain clothes became more difficult to put on and fashionable shoes impossible to wear. The shock when searching for funeral clothes to find the blunt, squat, rubber-soled shoes lined up like obedient schoolgirls, rows of drabness after a lifetime of fabulous foot glory. This is what fashion had done to my audacious mother, reduced her to this meekness, row upon hoarded row of it, all worn for nothing but comfort in the final years of her life. So it really stripped away her identity in many ways, didn't it?
It did. It did. And she had been renovating her flat in the final months of her life. She'd been stripping her bathroom out to get a new one in. And I could just feel her frustration because the builders were mucking her around. They were going off to other jobs. They were coming back for a day or two and then disappearing again. And I thought, they're treating her like the little old lady, the invisible little old lady she never wanted to become. That she was too magnificent and fierce and bold and vivacious and stubborn to be, and they were reducing her to that.
And she lost her power.
Yeah, she lost all power. You know, they wouldn't listen when they left an elderly woman without a means to wash herself. She didn't have a bath. She didn't have a shower. She only had a laundry sink and a little tiny side toilet. She was coming to my place to shower, or she'd be sponging. And, you know, this is an elderly woman who was so particular about how she looked and how she presented herself to the world. Image was everything. And it was like those builders couldn't care less because a generation under her was louder and more demanding or whatever. And she was little old Elayn. She'll be right. We'll get back to her eventually. Until she wasn't right. And then it was the builders who found her.
Was that deliberate, do you think?
Yeah, I wonder about that, and I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know.
Why do you think she didn't leave a note? You must have just
I think she was so... I know. I think she was in so much despair, and the fact that she didn't explain it or leave a note or anything has broken my heart. In the last week of her life, I asked her to set up a system where we'd check in with each other every day because I was just worried about her. So I was doing that, and then I'd send her an email on the Thursday morning just saying, "Mum, are you okay?" The regular thing. And then at 5 o'clock on the Thursday afternoon, she emailed back to me, "Nick, I'm okay, just drugged up to the gills, XXX." That was the last thing I got from her, and the police came late the Friday morning to tell me that her body had been found by the builders at about 9 o'clock, 8 o'clock that morning when they'd checked, you know, they'd let themselves in with the key to do the work. So she was sitting on her favourite armchair. The television was still on. The Bachelorette final had been on the night before, and I'm just hoping Mum went out laughing. We would have had a good old cack about that one. But they found her there. They thought she was asleep, and she was dead. And there was an empty pill bottle next to her, and an empty tumbler of Bailey's Irish Cream. And Dr. Nitschke's Peaceful Pills Handbook recommends Bailey's as something to take to kind of nullify the bitter taste of the pills. So she did it by the book in that respect. But she didn't leave a note, and she just left me with that very short email message saying drugged up to the gills, but I'm okay. I do wonder, though, if she'd said anything more, I would have got worried and come around. And so I would have disrupted the whole process. I just get the feeling that on that final day, she was overwhelmed and despairing. She'd taken a lot of drugs. She brought in an alcohol order for that day. The builders told me that, and she's not a drinker at all.
She'd had it delivered.
She'd had it delivered to her flat. And yeah, I just want to hold her, and I just wish I'd been there just to hold her through whatever the bleakness was on that final day.
But you couldn't.
No.
You legally couldn't.
No, exactly.
You legally couldn't.
Exactly.
Have done
and perhaps
that.
she was thinking of all of that. Because the Philip Nitschke handbook does talk about the legal implications and all the rest of it. So, yeah, she did all of her children a favour in that respect. It was a very clean death, legally, and all the rest of it.
Have you found any peace with it now? Did the book feel, and it is just such a magnificent book. For anyone who's lost anyone, euthanasia aside, it's the most beautiful. I'm going to give it to my mum, who lost her father a year or so ago, 2 years ago now. And I was telling her about it, and I said, you use the word feeling unmoored from the world. And she said, yes, that is exactly the word that you feel when you're grieving. I don't know if it's grieving a parent, perhaps is a particular thing. That feeling of being unmoored and floating freely. And you had to do all of this while looking after 4 kids.
Yes.
4 little kids.
Yes. I feel like I had a bit of a breakdown last year, and it's really weird to even say that, because I've still been functioning in my life, and it's weird how you can feel like you are just unmoored and falling apart and broken, and no one really knows around you. You just keep on going. But I feel like I've been a danger to myself and to others in the past year, on the road driving, or snapping at people in supermarkets, or getting really frustrated with the kids, or whatever it is. I just want to say to everyone, I'm sorry I was like that. It was like an axe through my skull for the entire year. I feel like my brain wasn't working. I couldn't write properly. I'm coming out of it now, though.
You're so tough on yourself again. Listen to you.
Mia, I feel like you're my therapist.
You are so tough on yourself. You say, tilting full on now into what is feeling like madness, becoming someone else entirely, exploding with anger at close friends, severing relationships, plumped with tears. Elayn is infecting me, weakening me, could destroy me in the end. Now I know why the traditional period of mourning demands a necessary disappearing. It is to save you from yourself.
Yes.
Oh, Nick, it is a masterpiece. I think also having kids anchors you into the world.
Well, forces you into the world.
You have no choice.
No,
they need
no.
breakfast. They need to be driven to soccer. Like, it has to happen. So, but you do. I haven't seen you much. I remember talking to you soon after I heard about your mum, and you were weird about it. You were kind of like, and I understand so much more now after reading the book, but I said, I'm so sorry about your mum. And you were like, yeah, it was really sad. And then you changed the subject.
Did I?
As if
I couldn't bear to talk about it.
No, exactly. Now and I remember thinking at the time, something's not right there. Something's not right there. And obviously you've got to have 100 of those conversations every day. And as someone in the public eye and with a million readers, you must have needed some real time to process it all. And I totally understand what you're saying about processing it through writing, but wow, it's all on the page. She's there.
Oh,
she's there on the page, and your relationship is on the page. And I think it's one that so many mothers and daughters, we're all daughters, aren't we? Every woman is a daughter, will recognise aspects of that. Even if it's, I said to my mum, I was telling her about it as I read it, and I said, thank you so much, Mum. Like, there are so many things, like a few times you were overseas for my birthday, and like, geez, compared to, I said, at least you tried to ring me. And there are, I think the intensity of the mother-daughter bond is something that's so hard to capture, but you've done it so beautifully.
Thank you.
Congratulations. And I'm so sorry.
Darling. Thank you. And I guess what I also wanted to do was, yes, I was like Margaret Thatcher, judging so harshly from 15, but after that long, long journey through adulthood, I feel like the death of my mother has grown me up. I finally become a grown-up. And I finally recognise that the complexity within Mum is the complexity within any woman, within all of us, within me, with all of us. And I should never have judged it so harshly.
Oh, I think you should have.
Okay.
I think you should have judged it harshly. And I think very much the mother you are, what I know of your mothering, is very much shaped in relief from the mother you didn't want to be.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think we're all that. We're all either aspects that we do want to be or in relief. And I think that you should have judged her harshly. She deserved to be judged harshly. There was some wonderful things about her, but she was complex. And
as we all are.
She let you down. You didn't let her down. So,
thank you, darling.
Just stop beating up on yourself, Nikki Gemmell.
Thank you, beautiful Mia Freeman.
I grant your absolution.
I feel absolved.
Thank you for listening to No Filter. What an extraordinary story that was. No Filter was brought to you by the Telstra Smart Home app. Telstra brings you the magic of technology with Smart Home, a clever little app that lets you manage your home from everywhere. You can buy Nikki's book After and all of the books that Nikki has written. Oh, I've loved her as a writer for so many years. Even before she'd written The Bride Strip Bear, her first few books, I can't remember what they were called. They all had one-word titles. They were sort of like a trilogy. And they were so good. She's just an outstanding writer as well as just an extraordinary human being. You can find all of them at ibooks at apple.co/mamamia. And all our other podcasts are there as well, including Love Life, which is hosted by Osher Gunsberg.
I'm Osher Gunsberg and this is Leanne Hall. Hello.
Oh, hello.
Love Life. It's a podcast about love.
And sex.
And life, I was going to say. Leanne.
Oh, mine's in the gutter, isn't it?
You're a professional psychologist.
Apparently.
If you've got a question about love or life, you can call us 02 8999 9386 because things are better when you talk about them.
Nothing's off limits. We'll talk about anything.
You do get squeamish.
But I like the complicated questions.
Love Life, out now on Mamma Mia. Subscribe in iTunes or the Mamma Mia podcast app.
If you want all our podcasts in one place, you can download the Mamma Mia podcast app, which is pink. You can find it at the App Store. It's a really good way if other people don't really understand podcasts and podcasting, because there are a lot of people who still don't. Just download the Mamma Mia podcast app on their phone, and it's a one-stop shop. You can suggest a guest or just ask me a question or leave a comment by calling the pod phone on 02 8999 9386. Does anyone ever call the pod phone, Liz? Not for us. Oh, you can call the pod phone on that number and talk about any of the Mamma Mia podcasts, but no one ever calls and talks about No Filter. But I like to think that's probably because I've used up all the words on this podcast and there are none left. There's no more oxygen in the world after all this talking. You might be more of an email person. I am, and I feel that you are too, being a listener of this podcast. I feel that you're more someone who would like to email their thoughts rather than express them verbally. You can do that at podcasts@mamamia.com.au. And you should also know that today's show and all the No Filter podcast episodes are produced by the incredible Eliza Ratliff for the Mamma Mia Women's Network, which is the biggest podcast network in the world. The executive producer of that biggest podcast network in the world is Monique Bowley. No, it's Monique Bowley. I always get confused and it's been 2 years. When I first met her, I also thought it was Mon for short, but it's not. It's Mons with a Z, and it's Bowley, like bowling, a ball, not Bowley, like bow wow. And the head of entertainment is Holly Wainwright, and I've never ever got anything extra to say about her because she's just got a straightforward name. I will see you on our next podcast. Lots of love, and see you on the internet.